Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for joining me. This will be the last video for this appointment application. I do apologize. This took me a very long time to get together and put out. It's because of all the things that were happening with me personally and then with work. So things took a little bit longer than expected. So thanks for rocking with me if you stayed with me this whole time. I do appreciate you all. Let's get into this. For context, we're going to be handling the appointment routes today. So I've already done the user routes. You can go on my GitHub page. It's linked below to check out the user routes. So the user routes are just like seeing a user, updating a user, creating a user, deleting a user. Those basic CRUD methods on a user. I did not want to show those here because they're pretty self-explanatory. It's just a user and you're seeing it, you're updating it, all those things. It's a similar process for appointment stuff. The only difference is that now we have types of appointments also that we want to show the user. So I did want to make this video specifically for the appointment routes, and let's get into it. So the first thing that we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to create a route to get appointments. So you'll see me writing a /appointment route, /appointments route, and that's gonna go to appointments controller and the index method. What we're trying to accomplish here is we're trying to get all the appointments, and we're also trying to search for an appointment by specific values. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. I also don't have an appointment controller, so I'm going to make a controller, PHP Artisan make controller, and then I'm going to name that appointment controller. If I could spell it. Alright, so it's created successfully. Kind of remove that directory file structure so we can have a cleaner screen. Now let's go to the appointment controller. Alright, so here's what we have. And I'm just going to start here. Creating an index. That's the method. If you see squiggly lines, again, that's just my code editor. My code editor's a little upset. So that's okay. It's not like you have to do it this way. This is just my code editor mad at me. And then I said, oh, but wait, we need a constructor so we could pass in the appointment repository. All right, so we have the appointment interface is what we're going to pass in, which essentially is the repository. It's just the contract for the repository. That's how you could think of that. So now I'm going to say this appointments. I struggled here. I'm like, plural or not plural? If you have any idea if it should be plural or not plural, comment below. I said plural because at first I was like, well, there's many appointments. And then I was like, but there's only one interface. You see, I go back. There's one interface though. So that's why I kept it singular. And then I was like plural. And then now I'm singular. I'm indifferent. But I think I left it as singular. So appointment, I'm defining a variable up here so that I can access this appointment. If I don't do this, if I don't add the variable appointments as a protected value or as a variable in general, I will not be able to use this appointment. And I think, okay, I changed it to appointment. All right, so I set that equal to the app interface, or appointment interface, sorry. Now I'm going back to my index that I created, and I'm passing in a request. This request is going to allow me to access the parameters that I have whenever I'm like searching, or if I'm basically searching in this case. So I'm setting user appointments equal to this appointment index, which doesn't exist, which is why it's red. And then I realized I forgot to get the request parameters. So I'm going to go back and do that now. So request query, and this query is just going to get all the parameters for me. So I don't have to list them out individually, but you certainly could. Just for the specific purposes of this instance, I'm not going to list them out, but you certainly should specify which ones you want to get, just in case you get some data you don't want. And that's certainly something that I thought about here, but just for the instance of this video, I'm not going to do it. I might go back and refactor it though, and you certainly can as well. You'll have to create an appointment interface, as you see on the right side of my screen. I have already created an appointment interface, so I'm just adding the index method there and the parameters. So if you notice on my index method, I have a request, and so request object. So I do want to make sure I'm passing those values in to my interface, or else it's not going to work correctly. All right, so here I'm creating a repository, an appointment repository, and I'm just going to add it to my repositories folder. I'll have to define PHP at the top and then the class name. If you don't add that namespace, it's not going to know which folder you're trying to look into or where this should be located at. All right. So in this case, my appointment repository implements the appointment interface, which basically that's going to say this appointment repository should have everything that's in the appointment interface. And then I'm also going to bind my, as you saw I did with the user interface, the user repository, I'm going to bind my interface and repository, or repository, to my interface. And I'm just going to change those values, appointment, and that's done. You don't have to use the repository interface structure. I've always learned about, and that's just how I continue to do it. So now I'm going to make an index method in my repository. And this is, the repository is where I'm going to go to the database and look up stuff. This is where I'm going to get all my data from, and then I'm going to pass it back to the controller. So your controller should only be, quote unquote, like controlling things, for lack of a better word. In your repository is when, in my case, my repository is handling all of my query to the database, or queries to the database. I'm going to add the user model, because what I'm doing here on line 12 is I want to make sure that I grab the relationship of appointments and appointments type when it comes to the user. So when I grab the user, I also want those users' appointments, and I want those users' appointment types. It's very important that I do that. If not, I'm not getting all the data that I need. So users have appointments, users have types of appointments, different types of appointments. So I'm grabbing all that. And then here, this is going to be a lot of redundancy, which can very well be refactored in the future. But for right now, this is how it is. And what I'm doing starting on line 14 is I'm checking to see if the parameters have a value that's called name. And then if it does, then I'm just going to query on for that. So I'm going to say, okay, based on user appointments and types, is there a name that has this name that I'm searching for? And the name that I'm referring to is the user's name. So if I just wanted to search by user's name, does it exist? And then that's going to return back to me if it exists or not, or the values that match based on if it exists. And then I'm repeating that same process. So the next thing on line 18 is I'm asking, hey, does it contain, does the parameters have a date of birth? And what that means is, did I pass in a search value that contained the key of date of birth, and does that key have a value? If it has a value, then let's search that value. And then so on and so forth for name and email as well. This is just so I can search for things. So usually if you go to a doctor's office or something, if you call them or something like that, or even if you go in, they certainly ask for your name or your date of birth or your phone number or your email. And I'm just basically making it so they could search for those things and return a value. And I also have to pull in the array here for Laravel so that I can use array get in this manner. This last one is searching for an appointment date. So you could very well search by appointment date within this API. Again, it's the same thing. It's array get, and then you do parameters, which is going to be your array. And then in that array, you're searching for the key of date of appointment. And in this one, it's a little different. So I'm setting that same appointments value, appointments variable to appointment with user type, where the date of birth or date of appointment is equal to this appointment date, or that has this appointment date. The reason for me searching for this is eventually I do remove that get, so just so you know, it's not going to work later on. But we're keeping it for now. And then I'm also adding in the appointment model, because I'm now pointing to the appointment model. The reason why I'm now saying, hey, appointment with user and type. Above on line 14, we said user with appointments and type. But now we're searching appointments. And I know that you can probably most certainly use appointments here. So I might have to refactor that a little bit. And if I do, I will let you know on the screen that I did refactor. I'm just returning JSON here. And this is just going to return the variable apps, appointments. And then I'm just going to get all those values. All right, so now I'm going to test. This is Postman. If you haven't heard of Postman, it just makes it so you can test out APIs. You put in the route that you want to go to. If you see, I have my route there. If it's a get, post, request, or what have you. So as you see, I ran it and I didn't get anything back, and it's because I'm not returning the user appointments variable. So now I'm going to return that, and I'm going to send the request again. And now I get any values, any entries that have the name of Morar on it. So I have the user, I have the user's appointments now, and then I have the type of appointments. So that's what I was expecting. I wanted to have the users, you know, if they have multiple appointments. So this one is Lenny Morar Sr., and then it has the appointments for this person and the types of appointments they have. So as you can see, I have a few results just from that last name. That's typically how it would be if you search for somebody's last name, you might, or somebody's name, you might get several results back. Now I'm going to search for date of appointment. And as you can see, it gave me an error. It's like, hey, what are you doing? So that's why I had to go back and remove the get, because I'm trying to get it, and then I'm also just like, oh, also get me these things. So now I get the value I expected. So now I'm searching date of appointment, and this one is going to show me, of course, all the appointments that have that specific date on it. And then now I have user. I have the user that says, this is Bernhard's appointment. He's getting some crowns done. So that works as expected. Now we're going to look at the create method. So if we wanted to create an appointment, what does that look like on the API side? So I'm just going to create a method, and I'm going to call it create. And with the create method, I'm going to pass in again the request object so I can gather those parameters, because I will be passing in a couple parameters to create a new appointment. This is similar to like if you had a form on a page and you filled out the form. Well, after you fill out the form on the back end, you'll grab the values from that form and then store them. So that's what we're doing now. We are grabbing those values. So I'm going to this appointment and then create. I'm passing in the parameters I get, and then from the request. And then I'm going to my interface, and I'm just going to set a create method to my interface with the array of params. So your request values are going to be in an array. And then in my repository, I create a method called create, because that's what I named it. It's just easier to keep these all the same name. So I'm passing in the params. Once I get the params, I'm going to then use the parameters to find the user. So essentially I would be through params, I would pass in a user ID, and this would allow me to be able to use user find, and the value from array get params user would be a user ID. So again, I could probably refactor it to say user ID. Now I'm going to say user appointments, because remember we have a relationship on user so that I can get the appointments. And then I'm going to create here. So because I have that relationship off of user, which is why I wanted to get the user ID. So I'm going to create it with the date of appointment. And then I'm also getting a type ID. So this type ID is going to tell me what kind of appointment we're creating for this user. as I'm going through this, I'm realizing some refactors that I could make, and you can certainly make them on your own, but I feel like I'm probably going to go back and make these as well, because they might, I didn't realize it till I was talking it out with y'all, so thanks for this. But one thing I thought of is, like, if there's not a user, then, then how are would we create a user first, But then we also have an entire CRUD method, an entire controller actually that creates users. So I probably won't add it here. But if you wanted to, you could check to see if this user exists first. If this person does not exist, then you could return with an error and then continue forward. So on line 48, I'm basically saying return JSON response with the appointment that was created. And this is either going to return a true or false, or true or an error. And if we want to create a new appointment, we got to make sure that in our model, so what I'm doing on the other side of the screen now is I'm creating a fillable variable which has date of appointment and type ID on it. If I don't do that, then I'm not going to be able to add these. It's going to give me an error. There's also a few more from my table that I would add to this in the future, because if you see, I have a completed, a canceled, and a no-showed column as well. So if I ever wanted to update those, I'd have to also add those to fillable. So that's what I'm showing you right now, is that there are other columns that you'd have to add if you want to truly use this API. To its fullest ability. So right now I've got Postman up again, except then I realized I did not create a route for this, so it's not going to work. So I'm going to create a post request to /appointments conflicted, singular or plural. This is my life now. Yeah. I decided singular because I'm only going to create one appointment at once, one appointment at a time. Appointment controller, and then it's going to go to the create method, and that's what's going to kick all of this off. So now I'm going to go back to Postman. So I'm going to make a post request to the appointment route. And in my parameters, I have date of appointment, user ID is what I'm going to have to add. And I'm adding a time to this appointment as well. So I'm adding a user, and again, I could refactor this to say user ID, and then the user is just going to be 10. Whoever's user ID is 10. And then I have a request because type ID cannot be null when I insert into the appointments table, and it's because I forgot to add it as a parameter here. Just making sure everything's fine. I'm like, do I have everything? And then I realized I forgot to pass in a value for type. And I just said 6 here. Again, this is what we're doing at that appointment. It returns back nothing at this point. I'm like, what's my return? There's nothing here. And then if I refresh this, it added a new entry. So I have my user of 10, my type of 6, my date of appointment. It's correct. So now we are updating and deleting appointments. So of course we start with a route here. I'm going to create the update route, which is going to be a put request to appointment /ID update method. I'm going to pass in the ID. Again, is what you get from params. Now I'm realizing I need the rest of the parameters. I'm realizing I'm going to need the params. Yeah, so I'm going to go back up here. Usually, this is, again, it's similar to when you have a form and you want to update information on a form. And you have, okay, in this case, let's say we want to update the appointment date. Then we have a form that can do that on the front end. And then now we're just grabbing the data from the form. So it's the same concept as when you create a appointment, except this time we're making changes to the appointment. And here I'm just creating a log for myself so that I can see what I get from params. This log is going to dump out into that Laravel log file that's on the right side of my screen. So now I'm going to go to my interface and I'm going to make sure I create this update method, or else I'm going to get an error that says it's not existing. So let's make it exist. And we're just going to do the ID as an integer and an array of parameters. And then inside of my repository, again, I'm just going to go ahead and create a update method here. And in this update method, again, ID and parameters. You could certainly, I think you could pass in just request params, and you may not have to even have an ID, but I personally would like to go to the page and then update it. So that's what I'm doing here. It's like I'm going to this appointment and I'm updating this appointment. So that's what I wanted to happen here. But you could certainly group all the parameters together and do something similar as I did to the create, where it's all in one request. So now I'm finding the appointment by the ID, and then I'm going to update the params, and this is just going to return true, false, or an error. True or an error, rather. So then I'm grabbing, I'm making a variable so that I could return that variable. Because if it's an error, I need to see the error. If it's true, then I need to know that it's true. But then I decided, let's do a check. Now, this you could certainly do in the repository. This is just how I have it now. And basically I'm saying if there's not an appointment, then just return unable to update the appointment. So if the appointment doesn't exist, then return an error. Otherwise, we're just going to return appointment was created. Or has been updated, sorry, because this is the updated method. If it does exist and it works right, then we're just going to return appointment has been updated. Alright, so we're going to visit the first appointment. I'm just going to change the date of appointment here. I better see what it already says so I could show y'all that it actually changed. I just have to scroll up here, which I will realize in a second. I'm gonna scroll up to the first appointment. It's 2020-10, October 1st, 2020. I'm gonna change this appointment to 1 o'clock. Okay, now we have a error and it says it need to make it a put request. It's because I didn't change it in Postman. And then it tells me the appointment has been updated, which is exciting news. let's go see. I'm just going to refresh. As you see, now it says 1. So there we go. We updated the appointment. Now we're going to go ahead and delete appointments. So with this route, we're just going to go to the appointment, and then we have the ID of the appointment, so we don't have to get params for that. It's already in the params of the route. And then appointment controller delete method. So now I'm going to go and make a delete method. So now I'm going to say this appointment delete, and then pass in the ID. And then again, as you know by now, I'm going to go ahead and add it to the interface and the repository methods. So hopefully now you have like an idea of how I'm doing this. Again, this is just how I'm doing it. You could certainly do it a different way if you like. The right answer depends on your application and what you need it to do. And this works for me right now. So this is what we're doing. So I'm just going to find the appointment by the ID. And then I decided to do my check in the repository just to show you can put it wherever you want to put it. If the appointment is not found, then of course we want to say that it's not found. But moving to line 66 is when I say, hey, delete the appointment. At this point, we know the appointment's found because we checked to see if it wasn't, and then return to me the appointment. So I'm doing a delete request, and then I'm giving it the ID of the latest appointment that I created, which is 102. And as you can see, there's nothing returned. And I'm like, what? What's wrong? It was deleted, so it did what it was supposed to do. But then if I try to send the request again, it's still not sending me anything back. And it still says the status is okay. And I'm like, that's not right. I don't even have a 102 anymore.
A few moments later.
It's at this point that I realize that I forgot to return appointment. It happens. I spent a couple minutes trying to figure this out. I did not show that here because it's getting a little long. But now you can see that it says appointment not found. And then I got rid of my logs because I was like, ugh, I don't need it anymore. And I did go back and change that back to not appointment. That's a refactor I did, which you'll find on GitHub. So thanks so much for tuning into the series. I really do appreciate y'all sticking around with me. I know we had a little bit of a crickets happening in between there. I definitely am sorry for that. But we got it done. I wasn't gonna do another video until I completed this. So hopefully you all learned some stuff. If you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to leave them down below. Again, all the code is gonna be on GitHub. I know I mentioned refactoring through this process. Those changes are gonna be on GitHub as well. So if you wanna check those out, you can head on over to the link below. Check those out. And then if you have any questions, drop them below. Listen, I know that you can do this many ways, and there's probably a better way to do what I just did, and that's okay. So if you want to implement that, you go right ahead and you could implement that on your own, most certainly. I'd love to hear how you've changed things, or if you want to drop a link to your own GitHub repositories below on how you updated things or made things differently. I would love to see it. So go ahead and make sure that you like this video and you subscribe as always, and I will see y'all on the next one. Thanks so much for rocking with me for this one, y'all. I will see you guys next time. Have a great day.